Welcome in again to another edition of the Auburn Undercover podcast, everybody. This is Ronnie Sanders, joined by our special guest, Ellis Johnson, in Coach's Corner. How you doing this morning, Ellis?
Good, doing good. A lot better than Auburn fans, including my daughter.
Pretty rough weekend.
Yeah, it was disappointing too, and because I still think they're probably a better football team. They're a lot better than they played, and I think they're better than Arkansas. But it's a tough loss to have to deal with.
Well, it's hard to win any game when you turn the ball over 4 or 5 times.
Yeah, I mean the story, of course, is the turnovers, 5 turnovers, and the quarterback play. I know it's probably got Hugh baffled. But Ron, it's that old scenario when you have a guy who's been there with you for a while and he's a leader and like the locker room, and he has a terrible game, and it's not the first one he's struggled, and then you got a promising young guy and you want to see if he can do it, and he did it once, then he gets the starting nod and he implodes, and then you go back to a guy that you've kind of torn the confidence out of, and I think his decisions, meaning Hugh, I think his decisions were based on the right things. It's just always a hard decision to make in that scenario. And then I hope the thing will get back on track. And I don't know which way they're going with it, but I guess you hoped that Hank Brown would come in and continue to do some of those things he did the previous week, but he didn't. And then you go back to Peyton, and he wasn't terrible, but it just wasn't good enough to win. And then the turnovers, of course.
What do you do if you're in a situation like that? I mean, you've got a fifth-year senior and a redshirt freshman quarterback. And I think you said, yesterday it's gonna be a competition. He's gonna see where it goes. But so far, it's been a real struggle.
Yeah, I mean, it's something you want the players to make the decision for you. In other words, you want one of them to play well enough that they take the job, not that you have to sit there and flip a coin. And so far, they've both been up and down. And I don't know what you do. I mean, he's on the inside and we're not. And so he sees him all the time. And I just don't know. I guess you go this week, you go with the one who has the best practice and see how far it goes, and then hope that one of them that gets the nod continues to play well. The most important thing in this situation is that the quarterbacks themselves, the quarterback room, if you will, that they're all pushing each other, trying to beat each other out, but not trying to, feel like the other one's getting a better shot than you are. As long as they got chemistry between those kids, they both got enough ability. Somebody will end up playing well enough to take them to some victories. And then, of course, way off the subject, but very much important to it, the defense has been pretty steady. And we played good enough defense the other day to win that ball game.
Been a lot of talk on the message boards about a lot of these people think, Auburn's going to go 3-9, 4-8. My take is that I think they'll end up being a little bit better than that. I think Auburn will beat somebody. I don't see a 3-9, but if the quarterback is just serviceable, then both those games are probably winnable.
Yeah, I don't know what you say to the kids right now, but the first thing in my mind, if I'm trying to coach in that situation, is we have to go to a bowl game, because I think as long as they do, I mean, they have next to no chance of getting in the championship game. They have no chance of getting in the playoffs, but they can go to a bowl game, which would be the next step, I guess. And as long as you do that, you can have another good recruiting class. And that's what's going to get you out of this in the long run, is recruiting. Now, if you don't even get to a bowl game, it starts to drag on recruiting, and then everything starts feeding off each other. So that, to me, would be the most important thing right now. But they're good enough, if they can get consistent play in the quarterback and quit turning the ball over, they're good enough to beat some teams on that. They'll be underdogs too. But it is what it is, and they didn't play well enough the other day to beat a mediocre SEC team.
Well, I think that's the other thing that you mentioned, recruiting. One of the other questions we've had on the board, and I tend to agree with you, is, I think Auburn's got the number 5 recruiting class in the country right now. How many do you have to win to hold that together? And I think you're right. I think a 7-5 year, you go to a bowl game, I think pretty much everybody stays in. You start looking at 4-8, 3-9, then some of those things, then it kind of starts falling apart.
Yes, people start using it against you. when they're trying to untie their commitments. Look at this. They're not even going to a bowl game or whatever. But those kids made decisions for certain reasons that are still there. And I don't know that it'll affect the recruiting to a great degree on kids that are already committed, but I think it really would kind of be a tough thing to overcome moving forward. So, yeah, hopefully they can hang on to a really successful recruiting class and maybe even get some out of the portal too. And just, get something positive out of this season. I think the thing probably that hurts so much, I mean, Arkansas came in, they're barely in the top 50 in the country in scoring defense, points allowed, and you just cannot put up points against them because you self-inflicted wounds. You turn the ball over. And that's what's frustrating. You had one there on the table to beat just a solid team in the SEC, and they're going to see some teams that are a lot better than Arkansas. So that was the thing I'm sure he's disappointed. I heard some people say that his post-game comments were bad. I flipped it on, listened to it just out of curiosity. I didn't see one thing he said that didn't make total sense and was totally on target, in my opinion, for his kids and for his fans and for his university. I mean, he just told the truth. But I did think I saw a really, really disappointed and almost puzzled football coach who saw progress coming and all of a sudden just laid an egg. And it's probably hard to put your finger on it, quite frankly, but you guys got to go back to work and clean it up.
Well, we've both been there. No question about that.
Yep.
Talk a little bit about you talked about Auburn's going to have a chance to beat some teams better than Arkansas. What about this weekend, starting with Oklahoma?
Yeah, that's a tough one because the main thing, Oklahoma's a really, really good defensive football team. But I do think the other thing is I saw it coming for the Tennessee game. Everybody was talking about, can Oklahoma slow down Tennessee? Can they slow down that explosive offense? Yada yada. The difference in that game was always going to be, can Oklahoma generate some offense on that defense? Because Tennessee's defense is for real, and they couldn't. And they got a problem too at quarterback. Not totally like Auburn's, but they've got a little issue at quarterback right now. And the kid's supposed to be, the big star. He didn't have a great game. They had to pull him. So they got him at home again, and this is about the end of the home stretch, I think, isn't it?
It is. I think after this, Auburn goes on a four-game road stretch. So it's
and so far the home field hadn't really been a big advantage to them statistically, but obviously you'd rather play at Jordan Hare than on the road in the SEC. But yeah, I think this is going to be really tough because of the defense that Oklahoma plays, and I mean they slowed down probably the most explosive offense in America last week, and Auburn's got to play better on offense than they did. Now on the other side of the ball, if Auburn can continue to play well on defense, they got a good chance to take the ball off Oklahoma because they're struggling on offense right now.
Talk a little bit about Georgia and Alabama this weekend.
Yeah, I mean that's a good one to watch. You'd have really been thinking it was going to be a knockdown drag out until Georgia goes up to Kentucky and struggles to get a win. And I don't think Georgia's nearly as good offensively as they have been the last 2 years. Their group of receivers, the Bauer kid and the other one, McConkey, those guys, man, they were going to give you 5 plays each a game that would just blow a game open. And I don't think they have those guys right now. I think the quarterback's really good. I think Mike Bobo's as good as there is in the business, as a coordinator. But they don't have the targets that they've had the previous 2 seasons. So they're beatable. And then Alabama, they're so explosive right now. They seem a lot like they did last year. In fact, it takes them a while to get going on offense, and they look like somebody that just put in some plays yesterday, and all of a sudden they start hitting on them. And Milroe, I mean, if there's some way you can tie him down, the rest of their guys are not the producers without him. Rushing and passing each week, it's all Milroe. But he's a really good player, and I think Georgia's defense will be better than anything Alabama's seen this year. So ought to be a good game. I favor Alabama at home and their ability to score, and I think they can score without having to dominate the box. And if they can give Milroe a little bit of time, they'll get their points. If they can't protect him, it's going to be hard.
jump back to Auburn. I know we're jumping around a little bit, but a lot of Auburn people are asking. You got Ryan Williams going in there as a true freshman playing at Alabama. You've got some freshmen around the country playing, and people want to know why. Well, at Auburn, you've got these freshman receivers, you got these freshman players, these 4- and 5-star kids. Why haven't they come together? And my opinion is you got to have somebody give them the ball first. And second of all, this is a rebuild for Hugh Freeze.
Yes, no question. And I think a little, obviously some of it's the quarterbacks, but when a quarterback comes out of a game and doesn't have good production, most all the time, it's not just him. I do think their protection has been very average, and those kids have not been able to sit back there and get through their reads and be comfortable and throw with balance and put zip on the ball so it's accurate. There's a lot of little things that get into it other than the quarterback overthrew the receiver or the quarterback, threw it over his head in the end zone. A lot of times he's under duress, and they're getting sacks and things like that. But the reason that, I don't mean to jump around, but Clemson had 2 5 stars come in this year. They hardly showed up against Georgia, and they just didn't at the point in that time. One of them didn't even have spring ball. The other did, but they were high school kids. Now they're playing a little bit more and they're producing more. So the talent's there, but you got to be consistent in your route running. You got to not bust assignments. You can't line up wrong and cost them an illegal procedure or an eligible receiver downfield and all those little things. And coaches watch them all week. If these kids were ready to go and were going to be playmakers and so forth, they'd be throwing the ball to them and they'd have them on the field. So it could be a lot of things. They may just be still trying to learn the system and be consistent in it. Blocking may not be very good. They don't trust them to be able to run the whole package. Every play is not a damn pass play for a receiver. And sometimes if you're not going to block, you're more of a liability to the team no matter how many passes you can catch. So I don't know what the reasons are, but uh, it's frustrating when you bring in these great kids. Of course, everybody hypes their recruiting now. That's just part of it. It's another game on the schedule for your fan base, and so everybody hypes their recruiting, and that they do it partly because it helps the recruits too. But then they come in and they don't play, and then the fan base wants to know what's going on. Happens everywhere. But I do think got to get some production out of those young kids soon because they are really talented. And if they're not getting the production, it's going to hurt the football team.
And in this day and age, they're not going to stick around.
No, and that's the crazy thing. I mean, you got a player that comes in as a freshman and makes freshman All-American or All SEC. You might as well go ahead and open the cigar box because they're going to come in. They're going to have offers coming from everywhere.
Absolutely.
It's really sad how that part has come into it.
Let's jump around the conference a little bit. Arkansas and A&M and Jerry World this week.
I don't know. That's a hard one to pick, Ronnie. I think Arkansas is playing hot, cold, and Bobby will put up 600 yards of offense, but they'll turn the ball over 3 times in the first half, and so the defense ends up looking average. But it can be sometimes a little bit of a hard thing to predict. Texas A&M is not as good this year as I thought they would be, but they have won a couple of close ball games. Since it's on the neutral side, I mean, I just don't know. I'd flip a coin on it, to be honest with you. I do think that Texas A&M has a little advantage. They've been playing a little bit better week in, week out, but I don't know if I could predict this one. I think it's important to both teams, though, because Texas A&M has slipped in the top 25, but they're still, I think, in the middle of the pack in the SEC, a lot like a lot like Arkansas. So when these two play, I think it kind of gives one of them a leg up to get, really a top bowl game, and the other one may struggle and have to go somewhere and have a little letdown in the fan base.
How do you see Kentucky and Ole Miss?
I don't know. I think they will slow Ole Miss down a little bit, but I think Ole Miss gets 20 to 30, and moves on. The thing that I think is so important about this game is Ole Miss has not played a really good football team yet. Wake Forest is the only other Power 5 team they've played, and Wake's down this year. They've had some teams that could give you some trouble, but this year's not one of them. So this is going to be the first test for them, and especially a defensive test for Ole Miss's offense. And it'll be interesting to see if they're still as explosive as they are. My gut feeling is that they are. It may take them a little while to move the ball on Kentucky, but I think they end up scoring 30 or more, and I think they beat them pretty convincingly.
Let's talk a little bit about realignment. Pac-12 is getting back together. Well, in some form or fashion, I guess. Yesterday we had Utah State jump from the Mountain West to the Pac-12, and then the linchpin and all of it, UNLV, is a holdup. it's a crazy world in college football, else.
Yeah, I know, and I'm not a good guest to bring on and talk about it because I guess I'm just old fogey or something. I don't like any of it. I don't like the SEC Big Ten realignment, frankly. I don't mean it has to stay exactly like it always was for 100 years, but they've gotten out of their footprints. They've gotten out of the natural rivalries. They've gotten out of all the things that I think make college football a fun sport for spectators to watch. And I think they've also, Ronnie, they've let this portal NIL thing feed on each other. And the NIL thing is so out of control. I think it's a cancer that's going to end up eating them before they can find a solution because nobody seems to want to attack it and put some parity back in it. I mean, one of the greatest things about college sports is parity, and you're not going to have it. When I was a kid, like 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, because we didn't get but 2 channels where I grew up.
So
We had to go out there. We had to go out there and turn the antenna so we could get Charlotte, and then we'd have to turn it back the other way an hour later and get Columbia. But still, there weren't any college football games on. Maybe one each Saturday. And the only pro team we got were the Redskins and whoever in the hell they played. And the Redskins, they didn't win about 1 or 2 games each year. So if we found out they were playing the Colts or somebody said, let's go to Uncle Mac's house and watch the Redskins. So, yeah, I'm old, but the point I'm making is back then, teams like Carolina and Clemson, they didn't play on TV ever, unless they got in a bowl game and a national type bowl game. And then, I mean, even the Alabama Auburn game, that was the only game those two had during the year, unless it turned out they had a big matchup somewhere along in the season that could determine the conference, and they'd try to put it on. But, as a young child, if somebody cut the game on Saturday, I'm watching Washington and Wisconsin or Southern Cal and Notre Dame or UCLA play Southern Cal. And it really might have been exciting, but as it grew and they put more games on TV and the conferences took over the TV scheduling and away from the NCAA, you got more games on TV. You got more teams that are getting some money. You got facilities going up everywhere. You got places that nobody's ever heard of and didn't know how to get there without a GPS, and they're on national TV 2 or 3 times a year, and they start getting some recruiting attraction. So the whole thing, to me, we had national parity to a great degree, and I think it made better football, and I just think it was a whole lot better game, and I'm afraid that in about 5 years, if it's not totally destroyed, you're going to have about 15 or 20 teams with all the money. And when they got all the money, they can get all the players. And it's that simple. And it's sad because it's not professional football. You want to play for money? Go play with the big boys. See if you're good enough.
Well, and you're right. It's heading that way. And I'm a little bit like you. I'm still getting used to. I'm not young anymore either. Else, I'm still getting used to South Carolina and Arkansas being in the conference. I'm much less those other 4. But yeah, I mean, when I was growing up, we had there was a game of the week. It was on CBS at 2:30 or 3 in the afternoon, and we finally got ESPN. But we lived out in the country and didn't have cable or anything. My dad got a satellite, and we let's just say it wasn't legal. So
it's amazing how it's changed, and when things like that change, there are always some really good things that come from it. And we were talking the other day. I hate for people to have to listen to this unless they're older, but when I first started coaching, everybody was still using 16 millimeter film, and only big schools could afford to film practices. And so it was exciting when you got on film. The old saying for the coaches say, "All right, this weekend we're going to scrimmage, and the big eye is going to be in the sky, and you're not going to be able to, we're going to see everything you do." and you couldn't wait to get out there and put good stuff on film. Now every drill and every practice is on video or whatever the heck it's on now, and it's send it to the kids in their dorm before they even come back the next day so they can watch themselves. And there's a lot of good things that come out of that, but there's a lot of bad things too. And I know one coach who kind of he older than me. He said one of the worst things that happens when we got access to all of that, we watch ourselves too much. We don't study our opponents enough. And I thought about it. I said, you might be right. But technology brings a lot of things that can help, but it also, puts a lot of things out there that are not good. I think the players should be paid, but I cringe every time we would bring it up for years and years, and the NCAA would just be real backwards about it. You could almost see this coming as an end result. Had they just gone ahead and said, okay, across the board, each kid's going to get $100,000 each on that level, and then put another scale, et cetera, et cetera. And it would have been kind of hard for some people to accept, but the time they put in, Ronnie, they deserve it. And the people that come to the stadium don't come to see the coaches. The coaches might think they do, and they might have them spotted on TV with their little cameos 15, 20 times a game. The fans want to watch the players.
That's
So
right.
they definitely deserved it. They wouldn't be there if it wasn't for the players. But when you turned it into professional sports with no contracts and to keep them, you know, set somewhere for a few years, and you got all this transferring going on, they've lost total control of it. And you know who controls it now is the TV corporations and the courtrooms.
That's
And
right.
if college sports has lost control of it, that's in trouble. And it's not going to end up good. I can just tell you that now. It may end up good for 50 or 100 kids a year and 25 programs, but the overall damage on Power Five football is going to be tremendous.
Well, and group of five or group of six or seven or whatever it is you call it now. I mean, those programs are being just decimated. And then you see yesterday, I mean, Reggie Bush turns around and sues the NCAA and the Pac-12 and the and USC over name, image,
Yeah,
likeness. Um,
it's strange things going on. And when you look at it from one side, if Reggie Bush was playing today, he'd be getting all that stuff free. But he wasn't. Okay. And when I drive at 20 years old, I don't get a speeding ticket unless I'm speeding. Well, if I drive when I'm 10 years old, the law says I can't drive when I'm 10 years old. All I know is when Reggie Bush was playing, he was a cheater.
but
And
you're not
I
look at
don't know.
this.
Huh?
We look at it the same way. I mean, it's one thing to say, well, I deserve NIL money now, but I mean, the rule at that particular point in time was nobody was getting paid, but nobody was supposed to be getting paid. Um, we all know some people were, including him, but
Right.
but I don't. I'm not real big on changing the rules after the fact.
No. I mean, I don't know. Whatever. But those are the type things we're going to get into college sports now. Culturally, it's going to be rotted from the inside out. Just go ahead and book it. I don't know if it'll take 5 years or 15 years. This can't continue without tremendous damage. I just don't believe it.
I agree with you. And the other thing that's happening is you talk about technology creates opportunities. Technology also created a ton of jobs. You got 75 people in football office now doing what 15 used to do.
Yeah, very
And
true.
it's and like these guys, but I remember, a person we both know, a guy we both know who should remain nameless. But I asked him one day. I said, "Hey, I said, you got about 70 or 78 people doing now what four of us used to do." I said, "Don't you think that's enough?" And I said, "Don't you think that's too many?" And he said, "Well, probably." And it's a completely different world. I
Well, a
mean,
great example. I mean, hopefully there's some people watching this or will watch this when you put it on and they'll enjoy it. Well, that's one of the positives of social media and technology. On the other hand, some of the damage it's done to young people, some of them at 16 years old think they're a sports agent slash great athlete promoting themselves, and they do things and put things on there that are stupid. So no matter how much technology improves, no matter how much coverage we give to college sports, no matter how much money gets into college sports, we're fooling with a bunch of young people. They're going to make bad decisions because we all did. And some of them are going to be more damaging to them because it's getting into a lot of money and other things that they don't know what they're doing with it. And people who are corrupt are going to start getting in touch with them sooner than when they sign their pro contract. When you look at the things that some of these pro athletes have done with their lives, strictly because somebody stick $10 million in their pockets, you tell me what's going to happen when an 18-year-old gets the same thing.
Mhm.
And we're going to run some kids through these colleges and they're going to play at 2 or 3 different programs. They're going to get some kind of degree with a name that you and I can't even repeat. We'd have to read the degree name instead of just knowing it's a business degree. It'll be the International Studies of Low Country Basket Weaving or something. And then all that half a million or $2 million they got over 4 years, 80% of it's going to be gone. And they're not going to put any more kids in the NFL just because they pay them. The same number of kids are going to still make it in the NFL.
Right.
So they're going to wake up about 10 years after out of college. All the tangible stuff is gone because they didn't know how to use it, control it, and had no sense about what they did with it. And it's not their fault. Degree that's worth the paper it's written on. And they didn't develop any networking or friends that they can lean on. And they probably didn't learn a lot of things about life, how to do something and stick to it and beat somebody out for your job instead of run over here to State Tech U and get that job. So
Mhm.
we're going to have some individuals out there in about 10 years of products of this whole thing. And colleges and universities shouldn't be very proud of it.
Well, and I agree with you. You made a statement a minute ago that young people make bad decisions, and we all did. I've got 3 right now that are making bad decisions, and I look back at some of the ones I made.
No question. I mean, sometimes you think that guy's. How could that guy do that? And then about 10 minutes later, you remember something you did one Saturday night.
That you'd rather forget.
Yep.
You make a good point. I mean, all these young kids that come in with they make this money and they don't know what to do with it. I mean, if you remember Allen Iverson's agent, I don't remember who it was now, but set aside, I forget how many millions of dollars for him that he couldn't touch until he got to be 40 or 50, something like that. And but he blew everything he had, and now he's about to come into that money again. And so he owes somebody a debt of gratitude for not letting him touch it.
Thank goodness he was fooling with a good person.
Sure.
It's crazy. When I came along, Ronnie, we could drive when we were 14, and we could drink and we could go buy beer in the store at 18. You couldn't buy liquor or wine until you were 21. For 30 years, I thought liquor and wine was worse than beer because you couldn't buy it for 3 years. But I think back on that. Sometime I'm riding down the road and I'm looking at these cars coming at me and I'm thinking, I hope that kid ain't 14 years old.
Hey, I let my 16-year-old drive. This is a few months ago. She's 15 now. She's about to get her permit, or she was getting her permit, and she drove my car for the first time out of the neighborhood, and she got about a mile up the road here and hit a pothole and popped the tire. First time out of the neighborhood. So but we'll talk. Let's go around the country a little bit. What's your take on the new and improved Big Ten with USC and?
Well, it's a better brand name now, I guess. You got those schools that brought all that fan base and national recognition from the West Coast. So that's going to be good in that aspect. And for some fans, they love it. So I think it's going to be kind of weird. My gut feeling, I know I would. I think in about four, 4 to 6, 8 years, once they've all made their East Coast to West Coast trips, both ACC and Big Ten, I think they're going to realize that this wasn't the smartest idea in the world. We might have got a TV company to jack up some money because we got TV markets in both places. But the travel and the wear and tear and the toll it's going to take on these student athletes, which we just got through talking about a while ago, 90% of them are not student athletes. But it's going to be something they're going to realize is not going to be easy to deal with going forward. But I think Southern Cal found out real quickly that they got better learn how to play defense if they're gonna play in that league. I think that the Big Ten, I don't care how many teams they added, I still think the bottom half is not close to the bottom half of the SEC. I think the top half, you line those guys up, and on any given day, anybody can win. But you go down to the second half, and I think the SEC is still much, much stronger.
Talk about the expanded ACC a little bit. Cal, Stanford, SMU.
Ronnie, I don't know if you saw the other day, but what happened to North Carolina with James Madison.
I was texting with our friend Freddie the other night, who's now the tight ends coach at North Carolina.
Right.
Said, what in the hell happened to y'all? And he said our defense could not stop them. He said, I've never seen anything like it. I mean, you give up 70 to James Madison.
And they've been playing very well, very good on defense this year. It wasn't like they've been trying to figure out what the hell's going on for 4 weeks. They played really good. They've struggled offensively because they've had to go through 3 quarterbacks. And then all of a sudden, offensively, they did turn the ball over a bunch and put their defense in bad situations. But the quarterbacks, I mean, they're down to their third quarterback because of injuries and other things. But if you haven't, you need to go back and look at post game some of the things that they were looking at. And I heard some of these North Carolina, and these are writers or either broadcast people, I don't know, but they want some kind of 247 site that you would understand more about. But they're just talking about the history of it. They're not as much criticizing Coach Brown and their staff right now and what happened out there. They're talking about how North Carolina has never, ever made a serious commitment to be a good football school. And they haven't in some ways. What's happened to North Carolina is a mirror of what's happened to the ACC. For many, many years, the ACC was owned and carried by those 4 or 5 North Carolina schools up there, and it was all basketball. And even when they started getting the TV with the conference packages and so forth, the ACC sold their broadcast packages together. They wanted football and basketball because basketball had that northeastern metro TV market. I mean, people would, although they didn't have teams up there yet, people would turn on basketball. North Carolina Duke, there were people up in northeast would rather watch North Carolina Duke play basketball than they would watch any other football game up in there. And that went on for a little bit. But what happened now, football, college football, owns the TV market. And therefore, they're the ones that all these conferences are realigning around football. It's based on football teams. Hell, the Big Ten didn't go out there to get Southern Cal because of their basketball team. They went out there to get their brand name for football. And same thing with SEC. You didn't see the SEC bring in any team except for their football brand. And what's happened to the ACC, and there was a North Carolina athletic director who signed that last contract, binding them up to what, 2036?
I think so.
And there was some logic in it because there was a lot of shifting and moving going around across the country. And they said, hey, all the schools agreed. They said, hey, let's lock this thing into 2036. And then these TV people can't tell us we better do this, we better do that. We'll have them locked in. Well, they locked it in. Mm-hmm. And then the Big Ten enlarges, SEC enlarges, they get more money. And now all of a sudden the football schools in the SEC are saying, hey, we can't compete. They're getting $40 million more a year, and we got to beat these guys in the playoff to get anywhere. We got to play them in a bowl game. Well, these basketball schools, they act like they care, but they don't. They care, but they're not willing to really commit to the Big Ten. And you'll hear people that are North Carolina fans, and they'll say that throughout history, North Carolina has really considered football to be a necessary evil. They've never liked it. I mean,
I read what you sent me last night, and it makes a lot of sense.
Ronnie, we played them up there one year when I was at Clemson, and this was early in the season. I can't remember when it was, but basketball was going to have their tip-off scrimmage over in the Dean Dome. We're kicking their rear end at halftime, and it's kind of an upset. But we're beating them at halftime by about 14 to 15 points. Their fans started leaving the football game to go over and watch the basketball scrimmage before the game was over.
Wow.
Excuse me, I said it backwards. They were kicking our rear end. Okay? And the game wasn't a very good game. We were terrible. they leave the game to go watch the scrimmage in basketball. So my point is this: North Carolina is really a mirror of what happened to the ACC. For so many years, they thought that basketball would carry the thing as much as football would. And of course, over the last 5 to 10 years, that whole thing's flipped, and football's king. I mean, it's king by millions and millions of dollars.
No
And
question.
and so they're in a bind right now, and it's their own fault, and it's their own culture. And so Florida State and Clemson, and there are a couple of others that don't have their brand name, like a Virginia Tech and some of those guys. They don't care as much about basketball, and I shouldn't be using the word care. They care about everything, but they realize that football is a more important sport, and it's a terrible, terrible business model to put your basketball first. It's just
Well,
not smart.
there's no question. And then I guess, as you know, Clemson, Florida State are both suing to get out of the ACC. Where do they go? Because it doesn't
That's
sound.
nothing. All that was, they're a lot smarter than I am, I'm sure. But all that mainly was pressure to try to get more money out of them temporarily. I think the best outcome for those two schools, some of them, is to get the grant of rights pulled back to a year not so far out. And they're going to have to end up paying their way out. But like you said, you got to have somewhere to go first. And Clemson, the dilemma that Clemson has, and to some degree Florida, the SEC already has a footprint where they are and TV wise, and they don't necessarily need them. And they don't want to bring another team in there that's going to kick the rear end on every other Saturday. So I don't know how much everybody wants them. And the Big Ten, I mean, they got a little bit of that Ivy type thing too. They might go get Virginia and North Carolina instead. Bring in two more teams we can beat every weekend in football, but they got a pretty good TV market.
Mhm.
I don't know where they're going. And I don't know how more than 14 schools. I really think 12 is a good number for scheduling and starting to build some rivals again and that type of thing. I miss the old rivals. I just think it may sound, it may just sound sentimental or something, but I think that's one of the unique things about college sports are these geographical rivals, both close by and way away, like Notre Dame, Southern Cal. I mean, I
I
don't,
agree with you. I
you
miss
know,
watching Oklahoma and Nebraska, and I mean,
yeah,
growing up, I mean, Auburn's biggest rivals were before the SEC split into divisions in '92. I mean, Auburn played uh, Alabama, Georgia,
in Florida,
Florida, and Tennessee. Those were Auburn's
right,
biggest rivals. And then when you split, if you remember those first 12 years, you had two permanent opponents and one that rotated. And so
right,
Auburn's schedule those first 12 years where it was, your permanent opponents from the East were Florida and Georgia, and a lot of Auburn people were upset when Auburn didn't get to play Tennessee every year.
oh yeah. Well, when
Then
they added those teams, and it was so obvious why they threw Missouri over in the East.
Mhm.
I mean, it was all a power play. Alabama didn't want to lose Tennessee, Vanderbilt, and Auburn. They wanted to have all those, keep all those. They got people voting with them. Out in Vandy probably voted with them. But that was the most obvious time where you saw the kingpins controlling the votes in the conference, and the South Carolinas and the Arkansas and the whatevers. What they said didn't matter, and it was all
well,
because keeping those rivals together. But I wish they could. I mean, money's money, and it's always going to win in the end, and that's what's leading the show right now is money.
but I tend to agree with you. I just I like watching those. Uh, look, Alabama people get upset. Tennessee people are going to get upset if Alabama and Tennessee don't play every year. Can you? I mean, Auburn and Georgia have been playing for what 135 years or whatever it's been. I mean, people are going to get upset if those two teams don't play every year.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean they've played longer, I think, than even Alabama Auburn. Correct?
yeah, Auburn and Georgia been playing since 1892. It's the oldest rivalry in the Deep South.
Right. I mean, I don't know. I mean, that doesn't mean anything to some of these people that cut TV on just want to watch a good game, but I think all of that makes a lot of intrinsic things about college football.
Well, I think that's a lot of what makes college football. And this is just me. But I'd rather, as an Auburn graduate, I'd rather turn on and watch Auburn play Florida or Tennessee than I had watch Auburn play Oklahoma. but that's me.
Right.
But I grew up watching it now. And again, I'm getting old. Maybe today's generation that, it doesn't matter, but, I remember it was a big deal again when the conference split into two divisions and Auburn and LSU went to playing every year. They
Yeah.
hardly ever.
Oh, yeah. Well, the other thing, I think the SEC did a good job of maintaining a footprint to a large degree. But the Big Ten, I think, maybe I'm wrong, but I think they're going to start realizing we've created some problems here traveling all these sports. Football, you go once a year and you don't even go every year. You know,
Mhm.
you go over there and play and you don't go back for 5 years because, I think Clemson's going to play Cal, just Stanford at home, then they go Stanford away. Then the next year they'll go Cal at home, Cal away. And they'll be done with the West Coast. They'll travel twice in 4 years. Now, I don't know about that'll work with the Big Ten because I think they got more teams over there. But what I'm saying is, when you start sending the girls volleyball team over there, and they come home, and we got to send the lacrosse team back over there, and maybe they're going to do some kind of pod, where hey, let's schedule all these spring sports this week. We'll all come over there and play or whatever. When you start spending 15, $20 million for each sport on travel and other things like nature, I don't know that some of that's going to make sense to these people.
Well, no question. I mean, there was even some talk last year about some of those programs meeting in Dallas, where SMU is located, and trying to figure out do something, midway. It just I'm not sure that going from Gainesville to Norman, Oklahoma is one thing, but going from LA to Rutgers is it's just I'm not sure. I'm like you. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. When you've got one conference that you've got teams in Seattle, Washington, and LA, and
Right.
and you in New York, and Big Ten territory. It just doesn't. I don't know. It
No,
doesn't seem
it
like.
makes you got all those TV markets, and you made Disney happy or whoever, Fox or whoever, but I just don't see how the schools are going to figure out how we're going to do all this with every sport, you know, and even basketball. It means that every year you're going to take West Coast to East Coast trips because they play twice a week, twice a year. Some years, I don't know how they do it. Maybe they only play once a year, but basketball plays more games than football. And then after you get to men's basketball, the rest of it, now you talk about a money drain. You start flying those people all over the country and they don't bring any money back with them.
That's right.
It's going to end up being something they're going to have to deal with that they probably haven't dealt with on that scale before.
Talking about realignment, let me and we'll wrap up here in a minute. But you look back, we talked about the SEC realignment starting in '92. If I remember correctly, the SEC went out and tried to get Miami and Florida State, uh, who politely declined, and then the SEC turned around and got Arkansas and South Carolina. My guess is that both those programs, if they had to do it over, would take those invites.
No doubt on South Carolina. Arkansas, they probably now realize they found a diamond in the rough, accidentally. I think early on it hurt Arkansas. Their natural recruiting base was the state of Texas, and when Arkansas came in, A&M wasn't in there yet. So there was no team in Texas that was in the SEC, and they were having a hard time recruiting down in Texas. Somebody told me, I can't remember. I worked out there for 30 days, so I'm an expert on Arkansas. but I heard it said by one of the former head coaches that we get a really good high school player out of Arkansas and a really good high school player out of Texas. 9 times out of 10, the Texas kid plays earlier because they've been in better football programs or whatever. Plus the population, the whole thing. I mean, the emphasis on high school football in Texas, that was their big recruiting area. And for several years, they'd go down there and recruit, and they would say, "Well, Coach, y'all gonna play any games down there near my family or whatever, and they weren't. And when I can't, who was it that when there were a couple of NC State ex coaches that were out there coaching, and I can't remember who it was, the head coach, Ronnie, I'm having who did they fire when when Coach Ford went out there to help.
Well,
But the coach, the coach that was at Auburn for many years took over, and I can't remember who it was they fired, but those guys, they were coming back over recruiting South Carolina and Tennessee and North Carolina, because that's where the conference was then. And just Philip Rivers, for example,
yeah.
uh, they almost got him there. But anyhow, that was a big deal for Arkansas. Now it's kind of spread out now. They've got Texas A&M, they got Texas, they got Oklahoma, so they're back in their recruiting footprint now, and that may end up helping Arkansas. That those other Texas and Oklahoma schools are back in there now. They may have a natural recruiting area now. South Carolina, there is no question it helped them. First of all, they got out of the ACC back when there was an 800 rule. You could not get a scholarship and play in the ACC unless you made a minimum of 800 on the SAT, which is equivalent to about probably 1,000 now because they recentered the scores several years ago, so they get more kids in school. But it was hard. There were a lot of kids that Georgia and some of those schools would come into South Carolina and North Carolina and take them, and they played at better football schools simply because of the 800 rule. And it about crushed sports in the ACC, except they've not basketball. They'd go up in the Northeast and get their kids. So that was something mainly got them out of the conference, and they went independent for several years. And it was okay because there were a lot of independent colleges in the Southeast back then. East Carolina, uh,
Florida State.
Louisiana Lafayette, Florida State was still independent. Miami might have been. I can't remember. I think they were back then. But that wasn't such an unusual thing to be independent back then. And they kept all their money when they went to a bowl game and all that good stuff. But that life was going to come to an end. And to get into SEC and not have to go back to the ACC or something like that, well, it was no question. That's one of the best things that ever happened to South Carolina.
Well, I'm guessing that Florida State and Miami wish that they had made a different decision.
No doubt. I can't remember if that was the fact, but if they offered an opportunity and they didn't.
If I remember correctly, State and Miami were offered, and they said no. I remember Bobby Bowden saying publicly, like, I want to win a national championship. I'm not going over there.
No, you're right, and I think that at that time it might not have been a bad decision because they were able to schedule better and play about 6 teams that couldn't beat them, and then they'd play about 5 or 6 that were really good teams, and they'd still go 10-1 or 11-0 and be right in the middle of things. I mean, hard to remember now if Miami won 3 out of 5 or something. How many national championships?
They won 5. They won 5 over those. If you remember, I mean, 3 national championship. I mean, by all rights, and I know I went to Auburn, but by all rights, Auburn won the '83 national championship. I mean, Miami jumped from number 5. I mean, Auburn was number 3, and if I remember right, let's see, you had number 1. You had Miami at number 5, who beat number 1 Nebraska, greatest team ever, on a missed 2-point play, if I remember correctly, and in the Orange Bowl, and then Auburn beat Michigan in the Sugar Bowl, and Auburn's only loss that year was to Texas, and Texas lost in the Cotton Bowl. So by all rights, Auburn should have jumped from number 3 to number 1. Instead, you get the poll Monday morning, whatever it was, and Miami's jumped from 5 to 1, and Auburn's still at number 3. And but that's a lifetime ago at this point.
Well, it's and I think they were independent or Big East when they won all their championships, so they weren't even in a power conference. And of course, Florida State, I think, was independent when they won their first 1 or 2. I was at East Carolina 3 of those years, and Southern Miss 2 more. For 5 years in a row, I was at East Carolina and Southern Miss, and we were in that independence. It was a league of its own because we all used the same officials. So you really weren't in a conference, but in a way, we were all using the same officials, referees. So we played a lot of those guys, and that's a life you can't live today. Though these TV packages coming, through the conferences, everybody had to get in conferences, or you're going to get left out in the desert.
No question. Well, it's a good place to leave it. Ellis, we appreciate you being with us.
Yeah, man, enjoyed it.
Same here. See you next week.